Hello everyone, Sidewind here. Today I'm going to be talking about the Arcana skill in Pathfinder 2e. As a note, this video will likely be relatively short because although I'm covering all of the common feats, I am not covering the one rare feat that most GMs probably do not allow, to be clear. There isn't a whole lot to the Arcana skill aside from some basic things that are necessary for arcane spellcasters. So to start, actions are either untrained, which means anyone can use them. It's usually just with your ability score modifier, or trained, meaning that you must have trained or higher proficiency. Arcana only has one associated action, which is a trained action. It's called Borrow an Arcane Spell. It only applies for prepared arcane casters, so that's pretty much just Wizard and Magus. The way it works is basically you attempt to prepare a spell from someone else's spellbook. So if you have a wizard and a magus in the party, they can attempt this action to share the spells in their spellbook. To use the action, you roll an Arcana check, and on a success, you can prepare the spell in your slot. On a failure, you cannot prepare the spell, but you can prepare a spell you know into that slot. It's usually an easier DC than learning the spell from the other person's spellbook, but in general, this is a relatively niche action which most parties will not be using. Now for the feats. As I said before, I'm not covering the Reveal True Name feat, which is a rare feat from a book that's not always allowed, and I've sorted them by level. Most of these are more relevant to certain campaigns than others, or to specifically arcane casters. So the level 1 feats available with Arcana are, first off, Arcane Sense. This just lets you cast Detect Magic at first level as a at-will spell. So basically, you can tell there's magic in the room, and at higher levels, you can tell a little bit more about it, because once you have Master Proficiency in Arcana, it heightens to a 3rd level spell, and Legendary heightens to a 4th level spell. There's not a lot of complexity to this feat. If you're commonly facing arcane magic and need to know a bit about it or recognize it, this could be a useful feat to take. The second level 1 feat available is Quick Identification. Basically, it lets you use the Identify Magic activity, which is used to identify what a magic item is, or a magical spell effect in some cases. It basically just lets you do it in 1 minute instead of taking the usual 10 minutes for one of these actions. As you level up, the amount of time reduces farther so you can use it in combat, such as taking 1 round at Master, that's the equivalent of 6 seconds rather than 1 minute, or 1 action at Legendary. So again, if you're fighting a lot of arcane casters, it might be useful, but if you're not really fighting arcane casters, there's a niche to it, but it's not necessarily a critical feat to take for any build. None of the Arcana feats really are. The third feat is Recognize Spell. This is a trained reaction, which lets you identify an arcane spell in combat. Basically, whenever a creature casts an arcane spell, note that there's later feats which can let you use the same ability for other non-arcane spell traditions, but that's not always super common. Basically, you get a roll to see if you can identify it. On a critical success, you gain a +1 circumstance bonus to any save against the spell that the person cast, and you correctly identify it on a success. Note that if the spell is of 2nd level or below, the value increases as you level, so once you have Expert, Master, or Legendary proficiency, that number goes up. If it's below that level, you automatically succeed at identifying the spell. You're only rolling to see if you get a critical success. And if you do get a critical success, then you have the +1 circumstance bonus. But otherwise, even if you roll a failure or a critical failure, you identify the spell. The last feat is Trick Magic Item. Basically, you attempt to use a magic item you shouldn't normally be able to use. Like if an item only works for elves and you're a dwarf, you can attempt to use this feat to trick it and be able to use the elf spell. The way it works is you roll Arcana versus the item's DC. That's usually its level DC, but sometimes GMs might assign a different number based off the type of item. Like for instance, a unique item, some GMs, like me, might try to make that number higher, because realistically, it's probably more powerful than the level might imply, especially if the intention is to have an item which levels with the party. When you do this, on a success, you can use the item during your turn normally. You cannot then use it next turn. You have to reattempt the action, and it takes 1 action each use. On a failure, you can try again next turn, but you can't use it this turn. And on a critical failure, you can't trick it until you've completed your next daily prep. So basically, it knows that you're tricking it up until the next time you rest, at which point you can try and trick it again. There are 2 level 2 feats for Arcana. The first one is Assured Identification. Basically, you can never fail at identifying a magic item. Normally, when you fail to identify a cursed item, you misidentify the item as being a non-cursed item. Like, an old example is misidentifying Dust of Choking as being Dust of Invisibility. There's a couple of other items that work like this, like the Bag of Devouring and the Bag of Holding, but this makes it so you can never critically fail and misidentify an item. This doesn't just apply for cursed items, but basically for cursed items, if you cannot identify the item, then you just can't identify it rather than misidentifying. Basically, you can't be tricked. The second feat is Magical Shorthand. It also requires expert proficiency, and it is relevant specifically to arcane casters again. The way it works is basically, instead of taking a amount of time based off the level of the spell, you can learn any arcane magic spell in 10 minutes. On a success, you get a critical success to learn it, and on a failure, you can try again in 1 week or whenever you level up next. The reason that note is there is because realistically, in most campaigns, it's going to be 1 week, but if you're close to a level up, you'll hit that sooner. This also lets you use your downtime to learn spells which you do not have scrolls for. So if you've been adventuring a while and your GM hasn't given you a scroll for a specific spell you really want, but didn't realize you wanted it when you leveled up, then you can use this to learn the spell without spending one of your free spells upon level up. So basically, if you're a wizard or a magus, it can be useful, but if you can't cast prepared arcane spells, there isn't really a use to taking this feat. Arcana also has 3 higher level feats. The reason I didn't sort these by level is because one's a 4th level feat, one is a 7th level, and one is a 15th level. The first one is Cretan's Cognitive Crossover. It's a level 4 feat which requires trained proficiency in Arcana and one other skill that you can recall knowledge with. There's a listing by the feat. Since it is uncommon, your GM might not always allow you to take it. Basically, when you take the feat, you select 2 skills, and then whenever you fail a recall knowledge check with one of them, you can reattempt the check using the other skill. So if you take Arcana and Religion in this case, then if you roll an Arcana check and fail on your recall knowledge, then you can roll with Religion on the same DC to attempt to remember something. This can increase the versatility, especially if you've taken a very small number of skills, but it does not always serve as a ace in the hole. It doesn't always give you a better result, especially if you rolled with the skill you're better at to begin with. It's mainly useful for if you're encountering something that you didn't bother to increase one of the skills, but you did increase the other. The second higher level feat available is Quick Recognition. It's a 7th level feat which requires Master Proficiency. The way it works is it lets you recognize an arcane spell once per round as a free action. So basically, every single time that an enemy tries to cast an arcane spell, assuming there's 1 arcane caster or 2 in a fight, then you just get to know what they're casting. You still have to roll the check, but realistically, once you're Master Proficiency, you're unlikely to fail. The final feat available for Arcana is Unified Theory. It is unlocked at level 15 and requires Legendary Proficiency. It's a very powerful feat to have because it lets you substitute Arcana in place of Religion, Occultism, or Nature for pretty much any magic-related check. You do not take a penalty for doing this, unlike if you already could use any of them. In many cases, one of them is preferred. and with the other ones you have a higher DC. In this case, you get to use the DC for the religion check rather than the DC for the Arcana check if the Arcana check is worse. As it is especially high level, it's unlikely most characters are going to reach this, however. On this final slide, just a quick notice, again, I'm not covering that rare feat. They're unlikely to appear in most of the games. Thank you for watching. I hope this helped you understand the Arcana skill better.